The call came at 1:27 a.m., piercing through the silence of the wellness retreat like a blade. My phone buzzed on the nightstand beside the therapy journal I hadn't touched in days. I answered out of instinct more than curiosity. "Hey, Em. Just wanted to let you know I'm getting married. Oh, and the apartment and car sold. Thought you should know. Bye." His voice was chipper, detached, as if he were confirming a delivery, not severing family ties. My heart didn't race. It didn't sink either. It simply stopped feeling altogether like it had too many times before. I was at Serenity Pines, a mental health retreat in Oregon, supposedly resting, supposedly healing after my breakdown. But in that moment, all I felt was clarity. Jake, my older brother, the family's golden boy, their chosen one, had sold my apartment. The one I worked for, the one I legally protected, the one I never really told anyone the truth about. I took a slow breath. "Okay," I said evenly, "but you forgot one thing." There was a pause, a beat of hesitation. What he asked suddenly less sure. I smiled in the dim light of my shared recovery suite, my voice steady. "You never owned the apartment." Then I hung up. The kind of silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the stillness before the storm. Jake had no idea what he'd done. He thought I was still the quiet, broken sister, the one they could use, overlook, drain. But the thing about being pushed too far for too long by the people who claim to love you, eventually you stop breaking. You start building, quietly, carefully, and when the time comes, you strike back. Not with rage, with precision. I set my phone down, closed my eyes, and let the plan begin. My name is Emma Quinn. I'm 32 years old. I used to be the creative director at a boutique design firm in Seattle. I made six figures by the time I was 28, bought my own car, and closed on my first apartment before I turned 30. People used to call me the responsible one, until responsibility became something they could exploit. My family, my mother, father, and older brother Jake never saw me as strong. They saw me as useful, quiet, convenient. I wasn't loud like Jake or charming or endlessly adored. He was the golden boy from birth, the one my mother said had potential, the one my father called a real Quinn. When I succeeded, it was treated as a phase. When Jake failed, they called it pressure. My mother would say, "He just needs time, Emma." Not everyone matures as fast as you. My father, a retired Army captain, never learned to speak gently. When Jake crashed my car during a weekend binge, Dad blamed me. "Why'd you give it to him? You know he's not stable right now." But when Jake wanted to move into my apartment for a few months to get back on his feet, they made it a family mission. My mom packed his things herself. My dad called me and said, "He just needs structure. Let him stay. It's not like you're using it right now." I was traveling a lot for work then. I let it happen. That was my first mistake. Or maybe my mistake was being born second. Jake had drifted through a series of jobs, failed investments, and 3 business ideas that never left the whiteboard. I covered his debts more than once quietly to avoid the drama. I didn't want to be thanked. I just didn't want the shame. But over the years, the favors became expectations, and the expectations became obligations. I was no longer helping. I was enabling, and no one seemed to notice I was breaking. When my partner of 5 years died in a car crash, I stopped sleeping. When my firm went through layoffs, I didn't fight. When I started therapy, my mother said, "Everyone's sad sometimes. You're not special." When I checked into the retreat, no one visited. They said they were giving me space, but they took everything else, my car, my keys, my mail, my apartment, and gave Jake control. Jake, who still called me Emmy like I was a child. Jake, who'd now sold the apartment I paid for with my own exhaustion. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that before I admitted myself to Serenity Pines, I made one final legal move. I placed the apartment into a living trust. Not in my name. In the name of the Emma Quinn Family Trust. Structured by a lawyer I met on a flight to Denver, finalized 2 years ago before Jake even moved in. The trust held full ownership. I remained the trustee. Jake wasn't listed, not even as a beneficiary. I had protected it not just from him, but from all of them, because I knew one day they'd try to take it. And when they did, they'd discover I wasn't just the quiet one anymore. I was the one with the plan. 3 years ago, when I first signed the papers for the apartment on Oak Ridge Lane, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: stability. It wasn't just a property, it was mine. A symbol that I had done something entirely without anyone's help. No cosigners, no handouts, just my hard work. I spent months designing every inch, from the matte black kitchen fixtures to the reclaimed oak floors. I made it a sanctuary, a place where I could think, breathe. But barely a year later, after a string of long work trips and mounting grief from losing Michael, my fiancé, I found myself slipping. Sleepless nights became routine. I stopped responding to clients, stopped eating. The apartment that once made me feel strong began to feel like a museum of a life I no longer fit into. That's when Jake showed up. Mom said you needed help. He said, standing in the doorway with that smirk that always made me feel small. I can stay here for a while. Keep things running. I was too numb to argue. I let him in. He brought his things, 2 duffel bags, a gaming console, and a stack of unopened bills. The apartment changed quickly. My linen couch became stained with beer, the kitchen filled with takeout containers. He said he'd help with bills, but never sent a cent. When I asked him to contribute to utilities, he said, "Relax, Em. You've always got money." My mother praised him for stepping up. My father called it responsible. Meanwhile, I was shrinking. They all loved the narrative where Jake was the redeemer and I was the burden. Then came the final push. A year ago, after a particularly difficult therapy session, I announced I'd be taking a break from work to focus on healing. My mother rolled her eyes over brunch. "You millennials call everything trauma. Back in my day, we had no time to feel broken." Jake chimed in. "If you're not going to use the apartment, maybe I should take over the lease. Or better own it. Clean slate." I looked at him stunned. "You want me to give you my home?" He laughed. "It's just property, Em. Family first." Right that night, I didn't sleep. I pulled out every document related to the apartment and made a decision. I called my old contact Samantha Rhodes, an estate attorney I met during a design consult. We had spoken years ago about asset protection. "Make it a trust," I told her. "No one touches it without me." We signed the papers 2 weeks later. I didn't tell a soul. When I left for the retreat 6 months later, I gave Jake the keys not to own, just to stay temporarily. He treated it like a gift. But the truth was, I'd already hidden the treasure. He was living in something he never truly possessed. I watched from afar as my family praised his responsibility, how he posted photos online with captions like, "Grind pays off." I said nothing. Silence is easy when you're used to being dismissed. But I listened. I watched. I collected. Every time he mentioned something that didn't sound right, new furniture, a suspicious luxury watch, nights out in places I could never afford, I took mental notes. Then came the night he called. His voice was buzzing with excitement and arrogance. "I sold the car and the apartment. Clara and I are starting fresh in Miami. We're gonna make it big." Clara, his fiancée, who I barely met, who always looked at me like I was the maid. "You forgot one thing I said. You never owned the apartment." His silence spoke volumes. For the first time in our lives, Jake had no comeback. Because for the first time, I was holding the cards. All of them. When I hung up the phone that night, I didn't feel rage. I felt confirmation. For years, I had been made to feel paranoid, overly cautious, too protective of what I had worked for. But that call proved every quiet instinct right. Jake's voice had held no hesitation, no guilt, just entitlement. The apartment was his to sell, the car his to flip. My existence merely an obstacle to his narrative. I sat there in my small retreat room, the ticking clock on the wall, keeping time with the pulse in my wrist. The nurse had told me earlier that day I was showing signs of progress. Lowered anxiety, better sleep patterns. But now sleep was impossible. I stared at the ceiling, recounting every detail of the trust paperwork I'd filed. Samantha had walked me through every clause. The Emma Quinn family trust was clear. I was trustee and primary beneficiary. The apartment could not be sold, transferred, or leveraged without my direct written approval. Any transaction made under false ownership was invalid. I had protected myself even when I didn't fully understand what I was protecting against. I just knew deep down that my family loved the idea of me more than the reality. They loved what I could give. The moment I couldn't give, they'd move on. That night, I wrote a single line in my therapy journal. They thought I was gone. I was preparing. The next morning, I checked myself out early. The staff protested. "You're not quite ready." But they didn't know that I was more ready than I'd ever been. Not emotionally, not spiritually, but strategically. I didn't need rest. I needed resolution. I needed facts, confirmation proof. I called Samantha. "Activate the protection clause," I told her, "and pull all records related to the trust." There was a pause on her end. "What happened?" "He sold the apartment," I said. "At least he thinks he did." Her sigh was sharp. "That's fraud." "I know," I replied. "Now let's prove it." And just like that, I wasn't Emma the broken daughter anymore. I was Emma the strategist. Emma the owner. Emma the one who was finally ready to fight. The drive back to Portland from Serenity Pines was quiet, but my mind was anything but. I replayed every detail of Jake's call, the smugness in his voice, the assumption that I would be powerless to stop him. It was the same tone he'd used growing up when he took things from me and knew no one would care. My parents never punished him. My teachers overlooked him. And I forgave him until now. By the time I reached the city, I'd already made a list. Samantha was already pulling the legal framework confirming the trust's integrity. But legal documents were just the beginning. I needed leverage. I needed receipts. The apartment building on Oak Ridge Lane hadn't changed. Jake's car wasn't in the lot. Probably gone sold, just like the furniture, the paintings, the appliances I'd handpicked. I didn't cry. I unlocked the front door with my own key still valid and stepped into what used to be home. It smelled like cologne and weed. The kitchen was empty, the fridge humming with the low frequency of abandonment. I walked through each room. My bookshelf was gone. The artwork from Morocco had vanished. My grandmother's china box had been left behind in a corner like trash. I sat at the dining table, one of the few pieces he hadn't bothered to move, and opened my laptop. First, I downloaded every piece of trust documentation from the shared folder Samantha maintained. Then I pulled up the title report, the deed, and the escrow trail. Jake had forged a quitclaim deed filed under an LLC he registered in Wyoming to mask his personal identity. It was amateur hour for anyone in finance, but for an average real estate agent, it might have passed the first glance. But not past escrow, not past underwriters, and definitely not past me. I called the escrow company directly. "This is Emma Quinn. I believe a transaction has been initiated on a property I own through a trust." The woman on the phone hesitated. "We can't disclose details unless I'm the trustee. Please check the trust listed on title." A pause. "Oh, yes, I see. There's been an attempt to close, but the documents are incomplete. We flagged the deed for review because the notary stamp looked questionable." I exhaled. "Put a hold on everything. Do not release funds, do not process title transfer, and prepare for a fraud report." "Understood." I hung up and dialed Samantha. "We've got a window, maybe a few days. Then we use it," she said. "I'll draft the cease and desist." I wasn't done. I needed information about Jake's new fiancée, Clara. She wasn't on social media, at least not under that name, but I found an old LinkedIn profile under Clara Jennings, a few mutual connections, a marketing consultant. Oddly vague. Then I remembered Lisa. Lisa Tran, a private investigator I'd met through a former client. She specialized in financial fraud and domestic scams. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but I still had her number. "Emma Quinn," she said when I called. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again. I need help. My brother sold a property he didn't own, and the woman he's marrying, I think she's done this before." Lisa didn't ask questions. She just said, "Email me everything." Within hours, she had a preliminary report. Clara Jennings had changed her name twice, previously known as Clara Wilkes, 2 previous marriages. Both ended in financial ruin for the husbands. One had filed for bankruptcy. The other had relocated to Mexico, leaving behind 3 foreclosure notices. Jake wasn't marrying for love. He was being hunted. And now Clara had her claws in whatever was left of our family's assets, including me. But I wasn't the prey. I was the trap. I organized all the data trust docs, property, title, forged deed, Clara's aliases into a clean file. Samantha added the legal citations. Lisa flagged the wire transfers connected to the escrow attempt. We documented every email Jake had sent, every transaction he authorized, every lie he believed wouldn't come back to haunt him. By midnight, my dining room table had become a war room. My laptop screen glowed with power. I wasn't spiraling anymore. I was climbing. Tomorrow, I'd confront him. Not in rage, not in chaos, but with calm, relentless evidence. They thought I was fragile. They forgot who I was before I broke. The strategist, the builder, the one who never needed to yell to win. Lisa's next call came the following morning, just as I was pouring coffee into a chipped mug that Jake had somehow not managed to throw out. Her voice was sharper than usual. Emma, I've dug deeper into Clara. This is bigger than we thought. I sat down heart steady, ready. Go on. Clara Wilkes. Her last known legal name was flagged in 3 states for financial irregularities. None of them stuck, of course. She uses proxies, shell accounts. But the pattern is clear. She targets men with family money or assets, usually those under stress. There's a pattern of charming herself into inner circles, establishing joint ventures or cohabiting arrangements, then pushing for fast liquidity events. In English, I asked. She convinces them to liquidate assets, cars, homes, business shares, then vanishes when things collapse. 2 of her exes are bankrupt. 1 is in a psychiatric facility. I didn't blink. What's her connection to Jake? Well, here's the bomb. Jake was contacted on LinkedIn by Clara 6 months ago through a fake consulting firm profile. She posed as someone interested in investing in a startup. The messages we recovered once I spoofed her old address show her baiting him with promises of mentorship, shared ventures, even a supposed angel investor group she belonged to. Total fiction. So he was groomed, I said. Exactly. But that doesn't excuse what he's done. He used your trust asset in a scheme that may qualify as felony fraud depending on the DA's appetite. And the money from the fake sale, I asked. They've already moved half of it into an offshore crypto account. The rest is in limbo due to the escrow hold you triggered. What's the timeline if they try to run soon? Clara's done this twice before, and both times she disappeared within 72 hours of being confronted. I stared at the wall across from me where a framed photograph of me and Jake as kids still hung. He was 8, I was 5. We were smiling. Not because of trust. Because back then we didn't know how betrayal worked. Can we freeze the funds, I asked. Only with a judge's order or a formal police report. Then let's get both, I said. Samantha filed the emergency injunction with the county court that afternoon. I compiled the documents into a chronological dossier. Lisa reached out to one of Clara's former husbands. He agreed to send a written statement describing the same pattern. The DA's office reviewed our findings. They didn't promise prosecution, but they opened an investigation. And that was enough. That evening, I called Jake. We need to talk, I said. If you care about your future, you'll show up. Are you threatening me now? He laughed. You always loved being the martyr, didn't you? No threats. Just facts. 11 a.m. Cafe Alder. Be there. I showed up 20 minutes early. Not nervous, not angry, just prepared. When he arrived, Jake looked like someone who believed he'd already won. Polished smug, wearing a blazer, too new to be his. He sat across from me, not a hint of shame. You've always been dramatic, Em. I didn't steal anything. You abandoned the place. Clara and I just made use of it. And forged my name? I said, sliding a printed copy of the falsified deed across the table. He blinked. It's just paperwork. No one checks that stuff. You're wrong. I checked. The title company checked. The county clerk is checking. And a PI traced Clara's entire scam history. His face fell. Clara's clean, he said, voice wavering. She's my future. She's someone's past. Twice. With bankruptcy and fraud in both cases. I have sworn affidavits. You're just the next in line, Jake. I opened the folder slowly, page by page. Trust deed, title confirmation, escrow hold notice, Clara's aliases, former marriages, her shell companies, her offshore account, Jake's transaction history. You don't know what you're doing, he whispered. She's different with me. They always say that I said. Just before they lose everything. So what now, he asked. Now you have 2 choices. Cooperate or face charges. Because this is felony territory. You're on borrowed time. He looked pale. He didn't argue. He just left. And I knew then that his world was unraveling, not because I'd screamed, but because I'd shown him the truth. And unlike Clara, the truth wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't. The next day, I received a message from Clara. It was short-clipped, calculated. Meet me alone, no lawyers, no drama, just a conversation. I didn't respond immediately. I forwarded it to Lisa and Samantha. Lisa advised caution, but she knew I'd go. I needed to see her face when the truth was laid out. We met at a rooftop bar downtown. Clara arrived in a sleek black dress, sunglasses, even though the sun was fading. She moved like someone who had never been told no. "Emma," she said with a half smile, "you've made quite the mess." I sat still, my hands folded on the table. "You mean I disrupted your retirement plan?" She laughed. "You think you've won, but you're just a scared little girl trying to play grown-up." I reached into my bag and laid down the folder. Marriage licenses from your past, financial records, testimonies, fraud patterns. "We've got enough to bury you in civil court." She didn't flinch. "You can't prove intent." "You're right," I said. "That's why I brought someone who can help." I turned slightly and Lisa stepped forward from the bar entrance. Clara's expression shifted. Not fear, but calculation. "This is harassment," she said, standing up. "This is strategy," I replied. "You want an out? Here it is, walk away, no marriage, no shared assets, leave the state. You do that and I won't push for prosecution." Clara stared at me for a long time, then slowly nodded. "He's not worth it anyway." She turned and walked away without another word. Just like that. The predator retreating. I met Jake the following morning. He was already drinking early. Unshaven, unsteady. "She left," he mumbled. "Packed everything. Took the last of my cash." "Of course she did," I said. "She always planned to." He looked at me, the arrogance drained from his face. "I didn't mean to screw you over, Em. I wanted something of my own." "You did. You had family. And you burned it." He didn't apologize. He didn't cry. He just nodded like a man who finally realized the world owed him nothing. I left without saying goodbye. Some things don't need closure. They need consequences. The legal fallout began slowly, like a storm creeping in from the horizon. First came the formal notice from the escrow agency confirming the transaction had been halted indefinitely pending investigation. Then Samantha filed a civil injunction preventing Jake from attempting any further sale or transfer of the apartment or associated assets. I expected resistance. What I didn't expect was a cease and desist letter from a second-rate law office Jake had retained accusing me of elder abuse, emotional coercion, and unlawful control of family property. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so reckless. I sent the letter to Samantha. She called me 5 minutes later laughing. "This is amateur nonsense," she said. "They can't even spell fiduciary right." Still, the move showed Jake's desperation. He wasn't going to back down easily. That's when I decided to take things one step further. I contacted the buyers, the couple who thought they were purchasing my apartment. I scheduled a meeting, brought all documentation, and explained the truth. The apartment was never Jake's to sell. The sale was invalid. I offered them a full explanation and pointed them to the escrow company, which by then had already begun proceedings to reverse the transaction. They were angry, but not at me. They understood they'd been scammed. They threatened to sue Jake. I encouraged it. Meanwhile, Lisa uncovered something darker. Clara wasn't just a manipulator. She had 2 open investigations against her in Nevada and Florida. Allegations of identity fraud, forged tax records, and grand theft. Nothing had stuck yet, but Lisa handed the entire file to a contact in federal financial crimes. Clara had left Jake just in time to avoid charges again. But now she was on someone else's radar. Jake, however, remained tangled in the wreckage. I confronted my parents next. Not out of vengeance, but because they needed to know what their silence had allowed. I met them in their living room, the same one where years ago I sat quietly as they praised Jake for graduating high school while barely acknowledging my college scholarship. My mother poured tea like we were making small talk. My father crossed his arms and stared at me like a stranger. "Jake made a mistake." My mother said, her voice tight. "He's been under a lot of pressure. And you've always been so distant." I laughed softly, bitterly. Distant or self-sufficient? You ignored me because I didn't need to be rescued. But now that I've rescued myself from your son's fraud, you want to talk." My father's face darkened. "Don't come here to tear the family apart. He sold my apartment, forged legal documents. Do you even hear yourselves?" I stood. "You can keep making excuses for him. I won't. I protected myself because none of you ever did." As I walked to the door, my mother finally whispered, "We didn't know. You never asked," I replied. The last twist came 2 weeks later. I received a call from a woman named Denise, an attorney representing a class action group of financial fraud victims. Clara was their newest target. They wanted to include my testimony. I agreed. I gave them every file Lisa had gathered, every record Samantha had protected. Clara wasn't just a woman with a shady past, she was a serial predator. And now she'd be held accountable. Jake tried to reach out once more. A text. I lost everything. "I don't know what to do." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "You lost what you never earned. Start there." I didn't hear from him again. I moved back into the apartment shortly after. The place was stripped of all the warmth I'd once created, but that was fine. I wasn't the same woman who designed it. I was smarter now, harder, but not bitter. I repainted the walls. I donated the things he left behind. I bought a new coffee table and made it mine again. Not a monument to survival, a blueprint for what comes next. For the first time in years, I opened the curtains and let the light in. It didn't fix everything, but it was a beginning. Clara ran. Jake collapsed. And me, I rebuilt. That's what strong women do. Even when no one claps for us, even when we're called selfish, dramatic too much, we build, we rise, and when the time comes, we return to take back what's ours, not with anger, with clarity. It took months before the legal dust finally settled. The apartment was returned fully to my name, all transactions nullified and the fraudulent deed formally expunged from the county records. Samantha's filings had been airtight. Lisa continued to work with federal agents pursuing Clara's financial crimes. She kept me updated as Clara was eventually located in Arizona under another false identity. This time the charges stuck. Clara Jennings, Clara Wilkes, was indicted on 3 counts of financial fraud and conspiracy to defraud. She wasn't the first woman to manipulate men into ruin, but I was determined to help make her the last. Jake, meanwhile, quietly moved out of state. Last I heard, he was living in a small town in Nevada, working odd jobs no longer on social media. My mother sent me a birthday card that year for the first time in 6 years. No apology inside, just the words, "Hope you're well." It was the most acknowledgement she could muster. My father never reached out. And that, strangely, was a relief. I no longer needed anything from them. The craving for approval, for fairness, had faded. It was replaced with something stronger: sovereignty. I enrolled in a program for women in financial recovery, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to offer something back. I started volunteering at workshops for young women trying to escape controlling families or financial abuse. I told my story anonymously at first, but soon I stood in front of those rooms and told the truth without shame. They will underestimate you, I would say. They will mistake your silence for submission, your kindness for weakness. Let them. Let them believe they've won. Then build your strategy. And when the time comes, take back what they never deserved. Healing didn't look like forgiveness. Not for me. It looked like freedom. Like coming home to an apartment that was mine again, not because I fought harder, but because I prepared better. Like sleeping through the night without fearing another betrayal. Like walking through my city without wondering who was watching. One afternoon, I stood in the middle of my living room and looked around. The new rug I had chosen, the books I'd recollected, the quiet. I took a deep breath. I wasn't angry anymore. I was grounded. People assume justice comes with sirens or verdicts. But real justice is internal. It's the moment you realize no one owns your narrative anymore. They can smear it, lie about it, even try to steal it. But if you protect yourself, truly prepare for the day they show their hand, you'll still have the last move. My story wasn't perfect. My family wasn't safe. My trust had been violated. But I had reclaimed something bigger than property. I had reclaimed myself. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving. I was free. If you've ever been underestimated, used, pushed aside, know this: you are not broken. You are waiting. And when the moment comes, may your silence be the prelude to your rise.